Here we are. The final week of the MLB regular season is upon us. 7 teams have clinched a playoff spot. The AL postseason field is essentially set, but seeding is still a factor, and there's still plenty to be determined, though, in the National League field in the next handful of days. Hello, everyone, and welcome into this Tuesday, September 22nd edition of Around the Bases from 110 Sports, live streaming on the 110 Sports Network, 110sportsmedia.com/live, twitch.tv/110sports, as well as on demand on the website, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, where you can just search for 110 Sports. We've got a lot to get to here today on the show. We are dedicating most of today's episode to looking just at the playoff situation. We've had, as I mentioned, several teams lock up playoff spots, but there's still a lot up for grabs here with less than a week left in the regular season. The MLB postseason begins 1 week from today with the wild card round. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. Here's our rundown for today's broadcast. No top four today because I didn't really feel there was a need, because there's really a clear focus here, and I saw it breaking down into the couple of different segments for you. So this is how we're going to go through today's show. We're going to start by talking about the 7 teams that have clinched a playoff spot as of right now. When we last talked on Thursday's show, only the Dodgers had clinched a playoff spot. 6 other teams have since, so we'll talk briefly about each of those teams. Then we'll go through a couple news and notes. Not a ton today because a lot of the big news items I'm sprinkling in talking about all these teams. We'll come back after our first break. We'll talk about the rest of the probable AL playoff field. 3 other teams in the AL who haven't clinched yet, but it's likely only a matter of time, and that's pretty much set that those are going to be the 3 other teams in the AL field. So we'll go through those, and then we'll talk about the key races that remain in the National League, where we have what appears to be 6 teams fighting for 4 spots, 6 teams fighting for the final 4 seeds in the National League field. There are a couple other teams that are not technically out of it yet as well. So we'll discuss the rest of the NL field because there's a lot still up in the air there. Finally, we'll round out today's show checking in on some of the out-of-contention teams. Obviously, it may seem a little bit strange to be checking in on out-of-contention teams now, but I realize that this is probably going to be our last chance to check in on some of these teams that we just haven't really brought up on the show because they haven't really been in the playoff picture. But on Thursday's show, we'll, of course, be looking forward to the weekend, the last weekend of regular season action, so there'll be a lot to talk about. Next week, of course, we'll be starting to talk about the playoffs. So I figured this was a good sort of last opportunity in many cases to touch base on some of these teams that have disappointed this year or that are, understandably struggling with rebuilding as they undergo rebuilding efforts. So we'll touch base on those teams as well. By the end of today's broadcast, we will have touched base on every single team in Major League Baseball. Of course, we'll focus much more on the teams in the playoff picture and fighting for a playoff spot. We'll round things up with a quick look at what's on deck, some very interesting pitching matchups over the next couple days, and of course some key series here in the middle of this week. So let's go ahead and jump right into our first topic for today, which is the 7 teams that have clinched a playoff spot as of right now. And that number could grow to as much as 9 teams, actually 10 teams. By the end of today, we could have as many as 10 teams that clinch a playoff spot. Probably won't be all the way to 10, but 7 right now, 5 in the American League, 2 in the National League have clinched a postseason berth. So we're going to go ahead and go through these teams here really quickly. Well, not really quickly. We're just going to go through these teams and talk a little bit about the context for their success this season, essentially. So we're going to start with the Tampa Bay Rays, who as of today would be the number 1 seed in the AL playoff field. The Rays clinched their 6th postseason appearance since 2008 this past week. That's the 4th most of any MLB team during that stretch. It's just the 2nd time in franchise history that the Rays have made it to the postseason in back-to-back years. One big key to the Rays' success on the offensive end has been second baseman Brandon Lowe, who's hitting .272 with 13 home runs on the year. But in true Tampa Bay fashion, it's really been a collaborative effort Some of their top starting pitchers have actually underperformed a little bit. Tyler Glasnow and Charlie Morton both have ERAs above 4.2, but there's clearly some talent there that could show up, of course, in the postseason, and as well as Blake Snell and Ryan Yarborough with ERAs in the threes this year. Reliever Nick Anderson has been lights out, a 0.60 ERA in 15 innings this year, and Diego Castillo, 20 and two-thirds innings with a 1.74 ERA. There's a great back end of the bullpen for Tampa Bay, and that team has 12 pitchers who've recorded at least one save for them this season. That is remarkable in and of itself. With 5 wins in the last 6 games, Kevin Cash's club holds a 4.5 game lead over the Yankees for the AL East lead. They figure to lock up the division title within the next couple of days. The Chicago White Sox are the second team that I want to mention here today. The White Sox, who posted sub-500 records for each of the last 7 years, became the first AL team to lock up a playoff spot, and they're headed to the postseason for the first time in 12 years. Jose Abreu, the veteran first baseman, is having an outstanding season. He's hitting .333 with 18 homers, second most in baseball, and 55 RBI, most in baseball. He now is up to 666 career RBI in the majors, which trails only Frank Thomas among White Sox players in their first 7 seasons. And shortstop Tim Anderson, another name to highlight, he's second in baseball in batting average. He won the batting title last year. He also has 10 homers and 5 steals. Veteran lefty Dallas Keuchel, signed in the past offseason, has been outstanding this season. He just came off the IL, and he's got a 2.04 ERA for the year. The team has dropped 3 of its last 4 games, but they hold a 1.5 game lead over the Twins for the lead in the American League Central. As we've talked about before, 3 AL Central teams are going to be making the playoffs: the White Sox, Twins, and Indians. It's just the order, and then thus the seeding, that is still to be determined right now. The White Sox with a 1.5 game lead over the Twins in the AL Central. And as of today, they would be the 2nd seed in the American League playoff field. The Chicago White Sox, the Oakland Athletics, would be the 3 seed in the AL if the playoffs began today. The A's are headed to the postseason for a 3rd straight season and the 6th time since 2012. Only the Dodgers have been to the playoffs more since 2012 than the Oakland Athletics. With the Astros' loss to the Mariners last night, Oakland also became the first team in baseball to lock up a division title, dethroning the Houston Astros after 3 years for the A's first division title since 2013. Starting pitcher Chris Bassett has been outstanding for the A's. He has a 2.57 ERA in 10 outings this year, and young lefty Jesus Luzardo, just 22 years old, has posted a solid 3.86 ERA in 11 starts. Closer Liam Hendricks has been lights out, a 1.23 ERA, 13 saves and 14 opportunities. Third baseman Matt Chapman, as we talked about last week, is out for the season due to injury, but Jake Lamb, since being signed after he was released by the Diamondbacks, has an over 1,100 OPS in his first 6 games with Oakland, so they're hoping he can keep up his resurgence at the plate moving forward. The A's have locked up not just a playoff spot, but also the AL West title. And those are your 3 division leaders in the American League right now. The 4 seed in the AL field as of today is the Minnesota Twins. Entering action today is the Twins. They were my preseason pick to win the American League Championship, and I'm not necessarily betting on that today, but they're looking pretty good. The Twins clinched back-to-back postseason appearances for the first time since 2009 and 2010. With the win over the Cubs on Saturday. With just 5 games left on their schedule, the Twins, as we mentioned, a game and a half back of the White Sox for the AL Central lead. Either way, they're making the playoffs. Either way, they're most likely a top 4 seed. Of course, the difference really is just going to be their matchup in the first round of the playoffs. So with the current standings, as they are right now, the current field as it is right now, the Twins would be playing the Yankees in the wild card round. If they're able to win the division, that of course would change things a bit, but if they're able to win, if they were to switch places with the White Sox right now and jump into the 2 seed in the AL field, they would be playing potentially the Indians, who of course they're very familiar with. Though the seeding there could certainly change a good bit here in the next, well, a good bit's maybe strong, but a little bit here in the next couple of days. Michael Pineda has been outstanding for the Twins this year. Maybe outstanding is a little strong. He's been very good for the Twins this year in 4 starts since returning from a suspension. Center fielder Byron Buxton has 12 home runs in just 36 games. That's only 4 off of his career high. And of course, there's Nelson Cruz and his OPS over 1,000, and veteran third baseman Josh Donaldson hitting well since his return from injury recently. As I mentioned, they wouldn't be my pick to win the AL today, but this is still a strong team with a good to great offense and a deeper pitching staff than they've had in recent years, which could be key in the postseason. Couple interesting stats for you here. Outside of Randy Dobnak, who's not currently on the team's active roster, no Minnesota starter has allowed more than 3 earned runs in a start in over a month. So that's incredibly consistent performance from the Twins' starting pitching staff in terms of not having any blow-ups, essentially, in the past month. That's something that could be crucial if they can kind of keep up that consistency heading into the postseason. Jose Barrios, who's been the team's ace of the last few years, he wasn't doing well to begin the season, had an ERA close to 6 through his first 5 starts, but since then he's posted a 2.14 ERA, struck out over a batter per inning over about 30 or so frames. So the Twins right now holding on to the 4 seed in the American League field. The 5 seed at this point is the New York Yankees. They have also, of course, clinched a playoff spot, which is why we're talking about them here. What a wild season it has been for the Yankees. The team started 16-6. Then with the injuries piling up, they went 5-15 in a 20-game stretch to fall back to 500 for the season. Then they won 10 straight games to lock up a playoff spot for the 22nd time in the last 25 years, which is incredible. And now they've dropped their last 2 games by a combined score of 21-7. But overall, it's good news. The Yankees are back to doing incredible things. Giovanni Urshela, Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, they're all back from injury. And this team has made a complete 180 lately. A healthy lineup for the Yankees makes this team so dangerous offensively. They hit 19 home runs in their series against the Blue Jays last week, the most in a series of any length in MLB history. They also hit 6+ homers in 3 straight games. That's also an MLB record now. DJ LeMahieu is vying for the batting title. Luke Voit leads the majors in homers with 21. And here's a stat for you. Only Babe Ruth has hit more home runs for the Yankees through the team's first 53 games of a season ever. And I know 53 is kind of a random number, but you take the first 53 games of any Yankees season ever, only Babe Ruth has hit more home runs in a season than Luke Voit in that span. I mean, that's incredible. The Yankees are essentially right back to where we all thought they would be around this time of the season, which is one of the most feared teams in the majors heading into the postseason. As I mentioned, though, they've had some problems, particularly on the pitching end. The last 2 nights, giving up 10 earned runs both games. I'm not inclined to panic. I think it's probably just a blip on the radar. But it is something to watch here, the final couple days of the regular season. And those are your AL teams that have clinched a playoff spot. So it's, again, in terms of seeding 1 through 5, right now, Rays, White Sox, A's, Twins, and Yankees. There are 3 more teams in the AL field right now who will likely be clinching playoff spots here in the next couple of days. We'll talk about them coming up. But first, let's talk about the 2 teams in the National League that have clinched a playoff spot, and that's the Dodgers and Padres. The Dodgers, we'll start with them. They've been the number 1 team in my power rankings every single week this season. They are the best team in baseball, and it's not just me saying that. It's a pretty general consensus, pretty good consensus of this. The team took 2 of 3 from the Padres last week to become the first team in the majors to clinch a playoff spot. They're heading to the postseason for an 8th consecutive year, but still looking for the first World Series title in that stretch. And those 8 consecutive playoff appearances, the 3rd longest streak in MLB history. The Dodgers are essentially guaranteed of the first seed in the National League. I guess I shouldn't use the word guaranteed, but they're pretty well set to be the 1 seed in the NL, barring something crazy. And the expectations for the team are, of course, sky high in October. But there's plenty of reason to continue to be optimistic and high on the Dodgers. Justin Turner's back from injury and he's hitting well. Mookie Betts is tied for the NL home run lead and an MVP candidate. Clayton Kershaw having a great season at 2.15 ERA, more than a strikeout per inning. Cody Bellinger, who's had his share of struggles this year, appears to be heating up at the plate. And him on fire with Mookie Betts, Justin Turner, Max Muncy, and others in that lineup, it's hard to beat. Tony Gonsolin has been outstanding in his first 6 starts of the year for the Dodgers as well. They're 38-16 right now, and currently on track to post their best winning percentage in franchise history, of course, with the small season caveat, if that does remain the rest of the way. The Padres became the 2nd team in the National League to clinch a playoff spot. The 2nd longest playoff drought in the National League is over. The Padres heading to the postseason for the first time in 14 years. The last time San Diego made the playoffs, current Dodgers manager Dave Roberts was their starting left fielder, and Mike Piazza was behind the plate. The Padres have been one of the most exciting teams in baseball, one of the best stories in baseball this season. Fernando Tatis Jr. and Manny Machado are both having an outstanding years. They're both NL MVP candidates. And another outstanding year coming from outfielder Will Myers, the team's longest tenured player, who's bounced back in a big way and a little bit under the radar to me. He's hitting about 300 with 14 homers and nearly 40 RBI on the season. Will Myers has been outstanding. Tommy Pham, pretty great player for them. If he's struggled to remain healthy, he's back from the IL, as is starting first baseman Eric Hosmer. On the pitching side, Dinelson Lamet is dealing. He's got an ERA barely over 2. Zach Davies is having a great year. And then there's Mike Clevenger, who they, of course, acquired from the Indians, and Chris Paddock, the young promising starter who struggled some this year but appears to have turned a corner of late. Also of note is this. The team's top 2 relievers at the back end of the bullpen, Drew Pomerantz and Trevor Rosenthal, neither of them has allowed a single earned run while pitching for the Padres this season. Pomerantz, 17 innings pitched, 0 earned runs. He spent a little time on the IL. And Rosenthal, after being acquired from the Royals, he hasn't given up a single run with the Padres. His ERA for the season sits at 2.08. So an outstanding back end of the bullpen for the Padres. This is a team that now has, in its offense, Tommy Pham, Eric Hosmer back, Rookie of the Year candidate Jake Cronenworth, Fernando Tatis Jr., Manny Machado, and a resurgent Will Myers. So an outstanding group there, and you heard some of those pitchers. This is a really fun team that I'm hoping makes a deep postseason run. They certainly appear capable of that. So those are your postseason locks at this point. I should point out that the Padres, as the 2nd team to clinch a playoff spot in the National League, they're not going to get anything higher, though, it appears, than a 4 seed, because of the reminder that the seeding works that for each league, the top 3 seeds are the division winners in order of winning percentage. So even though the Padres could very well finish with the 2nd most wins in the National League, the best they can do, assuming they don't somehow jump the Dodgers in the standings, which is almost impossible, the best they could do is the 4 seed. So that's likely where they're going to sit, which means they're going to face, of course, the 5 seed in the first round of the playoffs. That is not set. Right now it's the Marlins. Right now the Dodgers would be facing the Phillies. But as we'll talk about here coming up, the rest of the field really below the Padres. You have Dodgers. You have 2 teams we'll talk about in a minute as the 2-3 seeds. Padres is the 4. The rest of the NL playoff field, not very set. I mean, there's some teams that are very likely, but not to the point of where I can say with a lot of confidence we know the seeding anywhere after that. All right, so we're going to go ahead and actually, we're not going to take our first break. We're going to go into here to news and notes because I actually decided to sneak those in here to our first segment today because we have a lot to talk about after our first break. Just a couple of news and note type items for you today because a lot of the big storylines and developments when it comes to injuries and otherwise, like I mentioned, are going in our segments about those teams individually. Few items for you. Major League Baseball and the MLB Players Association, they announced yesterday they're donating $10 million to the Players Alliance to help make the sport more accessible to black communities across the country. The Players Alliance is made up of more than 100 current and former black professional baseball players. They'll receive that money over 5 years for baseball equipment for black groups in need across the country, as well as a player-led mentorship program and a program to recruit black students to internships in baseball, among several other initiatives. The Arizona Fall League, an instructional league where MLB teams send many of their top prospects for reps in the fall each year, has canceled its 2020 season. Of course, there has been no minor league baseball this year, which means several major league teams have placed their best young players, their prospects, in their 60-man player pool, which has allowed them to train at their alternative sites. And some of those teams are actually going to enter their club's playoff bubbles as part of the taxi squad for each of these major league teams in the postseason. Those are some of the reasons why there's not going to be an AFL season, along with Major League Baseball's concerns about their ability to being equipped to handle COVID-19 in terms of being able to get the protocols in and systems in place. So no Arizona Fall League this year. Major League Baseball announced yesterday its Players of the Week for this past week. In the American League, it's DJ LeMahieu of the Yankees, 4 homers, 10 RBI, a batting average north of 400 this past week. Cole Calhoun of the Diamondbacks, the veteran outfielder, 6 homers and an average above 450 this past week. He's been outstanding of late. Final news and note item for you here today. ESPN's Jeff Passan reporting this morning that the 2021 MLB draft order is likely to be based on a team's 2020 record. Of course, that's going to be good news for the Pirates. We're going to talk about them coming up very briefly. The Pirates now, under that system, would be all but assured of having the number 1 overall pick in the 2021 MLB draft. All right, now we're going to take our first break. When we come back here on Around the Bases from 110 Sports, we will dive into, as promised, the rest of the probable AL playoff field, the 3 other teams that are almost certain to be in the postseason on the AL side, of the AL field. We'll dive into them coming up. Then we'll look at the key races that remain in the National League and the uncertainty that still exists there with just a handful of games remaining. Later in the show, as promised, we'll dive into a quick look at some of the out-of-contention teams and what they've been up to, and we'll round out the show with what's on deck. So still a lot coming up in the second half of Around the Bases. Stick with us. This is streaming live on the 110 Sports Network. All right, welcome back to Around the Bases here from 110 Sports, live streaming at 110sportsmedia.com/live and available on demand wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. We're going to jump right into our next segment here, which is the rest of the AL playoff field. So if you're watching this show either live or on demand, you'll see the seedings here for the AL playoff field as of entering play today. And we've talked about the top 5 teams, the 1 through 5 seeds already, because they've all clinched playoff spots. So then you'll see we have the Astros as the 6th seed right now, with the Indians as the 7th seed, Blue Jays as the 8th seed, the Indians and Blue Jays as the wild card teams right now. And I can tell you, as we mentioned, none of those teams have locked up playoff spots. But looking at Fangraphs playoff odds, each of those teams has a 99% chance or higher of making the postseason, according to Fangraphs. So that's what I mean. That's what I mean when I say that the field is essentially set. It would take an extreme, historic type of collapse and an historically great run to finish the season and a whole bunch of circumstances falling into place for this not to be the final 3 teams in the AL playoff field in some way or another, in some seeding order or another. So let's start with the Astros. The team is 5-5 in their last 10 games. They're just 500 on the season. And they've struggled to score runs. They are not hitting for a good average in September. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, they're not going to be winning the AL West for the first time in 4 years, as the A's locked up the division last night. The big news for the Astros, of course, is that Justin Verlander will not be rejoining the team in time for the postseason, and instead will undergo Tommy John surgery and likely miss the entire 2021 season as well. The Astros have a 3-game lead over Seattle for the second spot in the AL West standings, which may seem like not a lot, but you also factor in they have a tiebreak. They hold a tiebreaker over the Mariners, so it's really more like 3.5 or a 4-game lead. And as I mentioned, Fangraphs still has the 99% chance of making the postseason. The team's postseason rotation isn't going to be as strong as it was last year when the club had Justin Verlander and Garrett Cole as their number 1 and 2 starters. Instead it'll be Zach Greinke leading the way with several young, promising pitchers behind him in their rotation, just not ones with a ton of postseason experience. So that's the Astros situation right now. They're not exactly doing great here to round out the season, but it appears they're going to claim that second spot in the AL West standings, and it appears they're going to pretty much end up with that 6th seed. It appears the Yankees and Twins as the 4 and 5 seeds pretty much guaranteed to finish with better records than the Astros. Our 2 wildcard teams will start with the Indians, who sit at a basically 100% chance of making the postseason. They're in. They haven't clinched a spot, but they're in. And after dropping 8 straight, the Indians have been in a real period of struggles there. They dropped 8 straight, but they've now won 4 of their last 5 games. That being said, they still appear set to finish 3rd in the AL Central standings and in a wild card spot, either the 7 or 8 seed. There's no doubting the Indians' rotation. Shane Bieber's the AL Cy Young to be a 1.74 ERA on the year. Zach Plesac, a 1.85 ERA in 50 innings. He's been outstanding. Carlos Carrasco, an ERA under 3. Tristan McKenzie, others in that rotation have been outstanding. The question with the Indians, as it has been all year, as it's been for the past couple years now at least, is the offense. Cleveland ranks 26th in the majors in OPS and 25th in runs scored this season. Those are not the numbers of a typical contender, and that shows you just how good that pitching staff has been, that a team that ranks 25th or lower in OPS and runs scored could be guaranteed a playoff spot here and 6 games over 500. Not that they don't have some great offensive players, from Francisco Lindor to Jose Ramirez, who's looking like an MVP candidate. He's got 16 homers, 10 stolen bases, hitting .290. He's one of only 4 players in the majors, along with 3 shortstops, Tatis Jr., Trevor Story, and Trey Turner, who have stolen 10 plus bases and hit 10 plus homers. Jose Ramirez, an outstanding season, especially of late, has worked his way into the AL MVP conversation. Manager Terry Francona has been out of the dugout for a little while now due to a health issue, and it's going to likely continue for the next series or so for the Indians. Of course, his health, the primary concern, but he has been out of the dugout for the Indians for the last several weeks. And it appears this team is going to capture the third spot in the AL Central standings and a wild card spot here in the AL field. Final team to mention, the Toronto Blue Jays. They've won 2 straight after dropping 6 in a row, and their playoff odds 99.1% according to Fangraphs. They're likely the 8th seed in the American League field. There are a lot of exciting players on this Blue Jays team, like breakout outfielder Teoscar Hernandez and his 16 home runs, recently activated from the IL. It's also been a good season for Lourdes Gurriel Jr., who's got 10 homers and about a 300 batting average. Hyunjin Ryu has been great in his first season with the team. Taijuan Walker has been outstanding since being acquired from Seattle, but there are questions about the rest of this Blue Jays pitching staff. And it certainly doesn't help that closer Ken Giles is set to undergo Tommy John surgery. He landed back on the IL with an elbow issue, going to have Tommy John surgery, and he'll be a free agent at the end of the season, likely not to pitch all of next year. So the Blue Jays, a very interesting young team with a lot of interesting players. My 2 cents is I don't see them really being capable of a deep postseason run, but they're very much looking like a wild card team, very much looking like the probable 8th seed in the AL postseason field. Which means, as I've said multiple times here, what you see on the screen here from MLB.com, the postseason seedings, as of right now, is likely to be the way that it finishes in some order or another. It's very possible that it actually finishes with the order that it's in right now. The seeding finishes with looking like it does right now. There could be some movement, as I mentioned, the Twins within striking distance of the White Sox. They're 1.5 games back of the White Sox for the AL Central lead, so that could change. The Indians could jump into the mix for the 2nd spot potentially in the AL Central standings, and the Blue Jays could make a run on the Yankees for the 2nd spot in the AL East standings. All these things are possible slight movements, but again, this, barring something absurd, is your AL playoff field. In some order: Rays, White Sox, A's, Twins, Yankees, Astros, Indians, and Blue Jays. It's a much more complicated picture, though, in the National League, as you can see by the graphic that's on the screen, where instead of just showing you the 8 teams that are going to make the playoffs, I'm showing you 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 teams that have a realistic shot. And for the final 2 teams, it's not very realistic, but it's not absurd shot of making the playoffs. As we talked about, only 2 teams in the National League have clinched a playoff spot, the Dodgers and Padres. But there are 2 teams here that are going to be very soon going to be winning their division. The Cubs are the first one. They're almost certainly going to win the NL Central. They have an identical record with the Braves, who are the 3 seed right now. And the Cubs are almost certainly going to win the NL Central. The compelling race in that division is for 2nd place, and we'll talk about that coming up. It's been far from a perfect season for the Cubs. The team's offense has sputtered of late. Anthony Rizzo, Javier Baez, and Chris Bryant, 3 of their star hitters, all entered last night hitting under .220 for the season. A key bullpen piece in Rowan Wick likely out the rest of the way with an oblique strain. There are some positives, though, of course, as the Cubs 10 games above 500. Of course there's positives. Kyle Hendricks has been outstanding down the stretch, of 1.21 ERA in September. Yu Darvish has been an NL Cy Young contender at 2.22 ERA, 88 strikeouts in 69 innings this year. It's also been a breakout year for outfielder Ian Happ with an OPS above 900. One of the immediate concerns for the Cubs is Chris Bryant dealing with an oblique injury that David Ross, their manager, said last night he is worried about. There'll likely be an update on him some point today, but it sounds like it's possible he could miss most, if not all, of the rest of the regular season, if not more. It's been a really rough season for Bryant, but we all know what he's capable of. So, not a perfect situation for the Cubs by any means, but they're the second seed in the National League right now. They're likely to lock up the NL Central title here within the next few days. The same can be said of the Atlanta Braves. Some really good things to like about the Braves, but it's not a perfect situation. But they're likely to be locking up their division title in the NL East any day now. The team's offense has been sensational, entering last night second in runs scored in the majors and in home runs, second in the majors, first in OPS in MLB. In fact, entering play yesterday, Atlanta had 3 of the top 5 players in the National League in OPS. In first baseman Freddie Freeman, outfielder Ronald Acuna Jr., and outfielder and DH Marcell Ozuna. And then Adam Duvall, the outfielder who we've talked about before, having an incredible September with 11 home runs. There has been concerns, and this is the area where the Braves aren't perfect, and that's the rotation. Without Mike Soroka, who of course had a season-ending injury several weeks back, Max Fried, who'd been in the NL Cy Young race, he still is, though he's missed some time, he was activated from the IL last week. Rookie Ian Anderson has a strong 2.36 ERA through his first 5 starts in the majors, but there's shakiness nonetheless because it was made something that, I should rephrase this, there was shakiness with the team's rotation, something that they thought Cole Hamels would be able to help. The veteran activated from the IL, made his first appearance of the season over the weekend. Then he was placed back on the IL yesterday with left shoulder fatigue. He's done for the season, so that was a boost the team was hoping to get to its rotation heading into the postseason that doesn't appear to be happening. So there's Max Fried, a great pitcher, rookie Ian Anderson having a great season, but there are certainly concerns with that pitching staff. There's no doubt in the offense of the Braves, though. So, in some order, I expect the 1 through 3 seeds to be the Dodgers. They'll be the 1. And then the Cubs and Braves. Either Cubs, Braves, or Braves, Cubs for 2, 3. Padres is the 4 seed in the NL. And then it gets interesting. Right now, as of today, if the season was ending, the Marlins would be the 5 seed. They're 2 games over 500. The Cardinals would be the 6 seed. They're 1 game over 500. Those are your second place teams in the NL East and NL Central. Your wild card teams would be the Reds, 1 game above 500, and the Phillies at 500. And then you have the Brewers and the Giants, both 1 game under 500, vying for wild card spots. And the Brewers' case still potentially a second spot in the NL Central. And then further down in the picture, you have the Mets and the Rockies. They're the Rockies 5 games under 500, the Mets 6 games under 500. And they're technically in it, but their playoff odds both around like 5%. So very unlikely, not impossible. So that's your broad picture. Let's go through each of these teams here individually. And I'll try to do this here in a pretty simple fashion. The Miami Marlins, the current 5 seed in the standings, it's looking more and more like the Marlins are going to be heading to the postseason for the first time since their 2003 World Championship season. Pablo Lopez, aside from a couple outings, he's been a great starter for the team. Don Mattingly, a serious contender for Manager of the Year in the National League. His club, 2 games over 500, as I mentioned. And Fangraphs now gives the team about an 80% chance of making the postseason. So that's pretty darn good. It's still not settled, though. So it's still, they're still going to have to play well, or at least, fairly well, to round out the regular season to ensure a playoff spot. The Cardinals, as I mentioned, they're the 6th seed. They're just barely ahead of the Reds for the second spot in the NL Central standings. They've won 4 of their last 5 games, as I mentioned, just barely ahead of the Reds and then the Brewers. Giovanni Gallegos, their closer, Dexter Fowler, the veteran outfielder, back from the IL. Jack Flaherty appears to have gotten things back on track after a really bad outing. Adam Wainwright, the 39-year-old, having an outstanding season, a 3.05 ERA, which is top 15 in the National League among qualified pitchers. Now, there's the potential that the Cardinals could end up playing games on Monday after the regular season was supposed to end on Sunday because, of course, they missed a whole bunch of games due to their COVID-19 outbreak earlier, and not every one of them was rescheduled. So there's a chance that they could end up making up as many as 2 games against the Tigers in Detroit on Monday. ESPN's Jeff Passan, earlier today I was reading his latest story where he talks about the team not likely to play at any games on Monday against the Tigers if it just has to do with seeding. But if it has to do with whether or not they make the playoffs, those games would be played, or at least 1 or 2, however many are needed to decide that. So an interesting situation there that we'll update you on Thursday's show, of course, and heading into the weekend. So that's the Cardinals situation. The Reds, right now, the 7th seed, first wildcard spot in the National League. They've caught fire down the stretch. They've won 8 of their last 9. This was my pick to win the National League Central. Now, that's clearly not going to happen. I'm not saying that was a good pick. But this is clearly a team with a lot of talent, as they've shown in recent days. And they're in the playoff picture now. They actually have higher playoff odds, according to Fangraphs, than the Cardinals and the Brewers. Trevor Bauer is in the NL Cy Young mix. He's got a 1.80 ERA. Luis Castillo struggled early, 4-0 record, 1.26 ERA in September. Sonny Gray going to be rejoining the team's rotation today after recovering from a back strain, and that is an outstanding top 3 in a rotation that no team would want to face in October in the postseason. So that's going to be really interesting to watch. I'm really optimistic about this Reds team. I'm not saying, when I say optimistic, I don't mean optimistic of them making a deep postseason run. But I am optimistic that the run they're on now, they'll be able to carry that enough to make it the postseason, whether as a wild card or as the second team in the NL Central standings. An interesting fact about the Reds here, aside from their opening day win, this is the first time the team has been above 500 since May 14th, 2017. And I'll say that again because it's so remarkable. The Reds won opening day this year. You take that game out, they haven't been above 500 in 1,227 days until last night. So we're finally seeing the Reds, who've struggled to be a winning team, showing that they have some real talent, particularly in that rotation, and I'm optimistic about them making the postseason. Fangraphs giving them about an 80% chance right now. The final seed in the current NL playoff picture is the Philadelphia Phillies, who took 3 of 4 games from the Blue Jays this past weekend, but they're still not really carrying that much momentum down the stretch of the season. The team is 7th in the majors in OPS. So there's some offensive talent there, with Bryce Harper, JT Realmuto, and Didi Gregorius, as well as rookie Alec Bohm, having strong seasons. And Bohm has pushed his way into the conversation for NL Rookie of the Year with 4 homers, 10 doubles, 22 RBI in 38 games in the majors. But the Phillies bullpen continues to be a complete disaster, in ERA above 7 for the year. It was not improved by the trade deadline acquisitions of Brandon Workman and Heath Hembree from Boston, both of whom have struggled mightily with the Phillies. Bryce Harper exited the team's game on Sunday with back stiffness, but he was able to return yesterday. Didn't look very good at the plate, though. JT Realmuto, the catcher for them, the star catcher, has been out of the lineup for a while with a hip flexor strain, but he is expected to return today. So that's your current NL playoff field. The Milwaukee Brewers are and the San Francisco Giants both one game below 500, just outside the picture there. The Brewers have won 4 of their last 5 games, but they missed their 8th opportunity of the season to get to a winning record with the loss to the Reds last night. And these two teams have 2 more games against each other this week, so that's crucial. Brewers win the next 2 against the Reds, they're in the postseason field. Reds win the next 2 against the Brewers, and the Brewers pretty much buried. So crucial next couple games between those two teams. And the Brewers have maybe caught caught Daniel Vogelbach hitting well at the right time. He's hitting 410 with 3 homers in his first 12 games with the team. Corbin Burns has been outstanding this year. The right-hander with an 8.82 ERA last year. This season, 1.77, 83 strikeouts in 56 innings. He's been great. The Giants have fallen out of the playoff field where they were for a while there. They've dropped 3 of their last 4. They've got Mike Yastrzemski, their star outfielder, dealing with a mild calf strain. He hasn't played for a few days. They're hoping to get him back in there. Their offense has gotten cold. It's been one of the better offenses in baseball, shockingly, this year, generally speaking, but it's gotten cold of late. There's not great pitching in San Francisco. They're trending down, but they're just a game below 500, which is where the Phillies, in a wild card spot right now, are. Final 2 teams, as I mentioned, the Rockies. I'm including them here because they're technically in the playoff race with 5% odds, basically. But the team seems to realize it's not likely to happen. Third baseman Nolan Arenado placed on the IL with a shoulder injury, and he said, quote, "If we were in it, I think I'd find a way to play through it." So mathematically they're still in it, but at least Nolan Arenado realizes it's probably not happening. They've lost 4 of their last 6 games and released longtime former closer Wade Davis yesterday. Finally, the Mets, their playoff odds down to under 4%. They've lost 3 of their last 4 games. They're 3.5 games back of a playoff spot with 6 contests remaining on their schedule. Pete Alonso is slumping. Jacob deGrom continues to be awesome, continues to not get enough run support from the Mets. What else is new? Their postseason odds are getting really slim at this point. So that's your overall look at the NL playoff field right now, and several key races remaining. So generally speaking, here's the main takeaways. A big race for the second spot in the NL Central. The Cubs have locked up the 1 seed, essentially, or the division, the NL Central. But we've got a race between the Cardinals, who sit 1 game above 500, and the Reds, who also sit 1 game above 500, and the Brewers, who sit 1 game below 500 for the second spot in the National League Central standings. 1 or 2 of the teams that don't get that spot could win a wild card. Then you've got several other teams fighting for a wild card spot, including the Phillies, who are not far back of the Marlins for the second spot in the NL East standings. You've got, as well, the Giants hanging around, the Rockies and the Mets with shrinking odds. So we'll update you on the situation come Thursday, but the fact that this was such a detailed, long explanation shows you that there's still a lot to be figured out the final week. This final less than a week left in the regular season. All right, we're going to take our final break of the show, a quick one here. When we come back, we'll run down a rapid-fire look at the out-of-contention teams, touch base on every one, and we'll do a quick look at what's on deck in the next couple days in terms of key contests. That's coming up next here on Around the Bases from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to ATB Live from 110 Sports, rounding out this Tuesday show by, as I talked about at the top, touching base for likely the final time for a while, at least till after probably the postseason ends, with some of the teams that are out of contention. Just we haven't talked a lot about because they haven't been in the playoff picture, but there's still been some notable developments from some of those teams. So we're going to rapid fire just like 30 seconds a team here or less on some of the teams that aren't going to be making the playoffs. You're just touching base. In the American League, the Seattle Mariners, they're actually only a couple games back of the Astros for the second spot in the AL West standings, but their playoff odds are at just roughly 1%. They've lost 5 of their last 7 games, and veteran third baseman Kyle Seager, after a strong start, has come crashing back down to earth. It doesn't appear like this team is going to be capable of a playoff upset. The Los Angeles Angels, there was plenty of optimism about them heading into the season with Mike Trout, Shohei Ohtani, Justin Upton, Anthony Rendon added into the mix, Joe Madden taking over as manager. It just hasn't worked out. Dylan Bundy has broken out with a 3.29 ERA this season, but the rest of the pitching staff has largely disappointed Ohtani with an arm strain that's limited him to DHing. The team has won 4 of their last 5 games, but they're still guaranteed to their 5th straight losing season. Their playoff odds are 0.4%. A bright spot has been first baseman Jared Walsh, who's hitting .367 with 8 homers in his last 15 games. The Baltimore Orioles were a team projected for the worst record in Major League Baseball, and they've undoubtedly outperformed expectations this year. It was only a few weeks ago they were only a game or less back of the Yankees in the AL East standings, but they're limping to the finish line with 10 losses in their last 13 games, and what's been a solid offense has fallen off. One of the bright spots, rookie Ryan Mountcastle's emergence, the 23-year-old hitting .330 with 5 homers in 29 games. It's been a better than expected season for the Tigers, who were within striking distance of a playoff spot until not that long ago. The big news here recently for the team is that veteran manager Ron Gardenhire abruptly retired this past weekend, citing health concerns. He finishes his managerial career with 1,200 victories, 64th all-time. Bench coach Lloyd McClendon leading the team the rest of the way. It's a rebuilding club, and the attention turns to who will be their next manager. Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic reporting they're likely to turn to someone with experience, the frontrunners potentially being former Astros manager A.J. Hinch, still serving a suspension as part of the team's sign-stealing scandal that is over after the World Series, and former Marlins and Braves manager Freddie Gonzalez. It's been a winding path for the Royals this season in recent weeks, but their overall record is essentially what we expected from the rebuilding club. 24-year-old starter Brady Singer has shown some real talent of late. He's got a 16-inning scoreless streak right now. There's been few positives to speak of in what's been a disappointing season for the Red Sox, highlighted by a dreadful pitching staff that's posted the worst ERA in the majors. J.D. Martinez has had a bad season, hitting just .205 and leaving the team scratching its head. Rafael Devers, the third baseman, has been a bright spot, .283 with 11 homers. It's also been a rough season for the Rangers, who have the fewest wins in the AL. The team limping to the finish line with a 7-14 record this month. Lance Lynn has been great. He's continued his success lately, but he's been basically the only starter that's fared well for the team, and it still doesn't make sense why he wasn't traded prior to the deadline. On the offensive end, there's just not much high-end proven talent. Joey Gallo has double-digit homers, but he's hitting under 200. Only the Pirates have scored fewer runs and have a worse team OPS than the Rangers this year. In the National League, 3 teams to mention here. The Washington Nationals, the defending World Series champions, have been one of the biggest disappointments in the majors this season. You'll remember they started 19-31 last year and then, of course, went on an incredible run to win the title. This year, they also started 19-31, but in a 60-game season, there's no time for a rebound. Steven Strasburg out with carpal tunnel surgery. Patrick Corbin has struggled. Juan Soto and Trey Turner have been great, but just not enough support around them. The Arizona Diamondbacks, I made a bad pick with them as my second team in the standings in the AL West in the NL West in my predictions. That hasn't worked out. The Diamondbacks started 13-11 but have gone 7-23 since. Third baseman Eduardo Escobar has fallen off at the plate. Ketel Marte took a step back at the plate, and now he's injured. Madison Bumgarner's first year in the desert has been a disaster. On the bright side, Zach Gallen's clearly one of the top young pitchers in the majors. He's got a 3.00 ERA this year. Finally, the Pittsburgh Pirates, a rebuilding club we knew wouldn't be good, and they've been really bad. Worst record in the majors, as we mentioned, likely to get the first pick in the 2021 MLB draft. The biggest disappointment for the team has been first baseman Josh Bell, an all-star last year, is hitting just .226. The Pirates have lost 13 of their last 14 games. And there you go. That's your rapid-fire check-in on your out-of-contention teams. We've now talked about every single team in the majors here on today's broadcast. Likely won't be checking in with some of those out-of-contention teams again for a little while. Of course, if there's major news developments, we'll bring that to you in our upcoming broadcast. Just time for a very quick look at what's on deck. We'll, of course, look at weekend matchups coming up on Thursday's show, but just want to quickly tell you about a couple key series going on the beginning and middle of this week. We have the White Sox and Indians playing tonight. We've got the Yankees taking on the Blue Jays, and Garrett Cole on the mound tonight. Yankees have lost 2 straight. Blue Jays looking to get some momentum. Brewers and the Reds continuing their 3-game series, as we mentioned, to begin the week. Sonny Gray on the mound for the Reds tonight. This is, of course, really crucial. The Reds, with a couple more wins against the Brewers, could potentially be close to locking up a wild card spot or better. Meanwhile, the Brewers, if they were to drop 2 more in a row to the Reds, they could be out of the mix. If they were to win 2 straight, though, they're right in the playoff hunt. A couple other series of note. We have the Rays and the Mets playing tonight. And we've got the A's taking on the Dodgers. Both these teams have clinched playoff spots, but it's just an intriguing matchup. So coming up on Thursday's show, of course, we will talk about the big series heading into the weekend. Also want to note an interesting matchup for you tomorrow night as the White Sox take on the Indians. White Sox looking to hold on to the AL Central lead. We've got Lucas Giolito against Shane Bieber. That'll be an incredible matchup to watch tomorrow night. Blue Jays taking on the Yankees again to wrap up that series. Masahiro Tanaka on the mound for New York. So a lot of interesting series, a lot of interesting games to watch over the next couple of days. As I mentioned, coming up on Thursday's show, we'll have a little bit more settled. Potentially, a couple of teams will probably clinch playoff spots who haven't yet, but I imagine the NL race will still be very interesting. So we'll break down the latest there, and we'll talk about the key series probably a little bit more depth than we usually do for the weekend, because that could be the whole ball game for teams fighting for those NL wildcard spots. So we will talk about that coming up on Thursday's show, but that is going to do it for this Tuesday, September 22nd edition of Around the Bases from 110 Sports. Thanks for tuning in today for a lot of conversation about the playoff picture and touching base with every single one of the 30 teams in the majors. Make sure to check out our 110 Sports live coverage, which continues with the J Mole Show with Josh Molnix tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern. Touchline Talk with Josh Doring back with you on Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern. Around the Bases returns at 1 p.m. on Thursday. And go to 110sportsmedia.com for the latest. All our written content and media available on demand. Thanks for watching ATB Live. Stay safe, and I will talk to you on Thursday.